Imagine, demand, and build a world transformed.
Hello and welcome to this super exciting all-star panel hosted by The World Transformed. I'm Ash Sarkar, but I'm not going to take up too much of your time because there are more exciting people to hear from this evening. I assure you this is not your grandma's Zoom meeting. So without much further ado, because we only have half an hour tonight, I'm going to introduce our two speakers. They are pioneers in their field. They are true leaders, they are icons, and my gosh, we are just so lucky to have them with us this evening. First up, we have got a longtime friend of The World Transformed. It's living Hackney legend, the UK's first ever Black and female MP, Socialist Campaign Group stalwart, and former Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott. Welcome, Diane. She's always got really impressive lippy, which is why I'm wearing my goth one today, just to compete. And in the blue corner, because I don't really know why I'm introducing this like a boxing match, but I am. In the blue corner, we have got 1/4 of the squad who is living in Donald Trump's head rent-free when she's not in Washington or Minneapolis. Please welcome to The World Transformed, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
Glad to be here with you all. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for joining us. So this is more of an in-conversation thing. I'm just here to prod the conversation with a stick every so often by addressing questions to both of you. But really, we want to hear from you guys and not from me. And so the first question I want to kick off with, it's a bit of a tricky one, so feel free to just strategically go on mute if you don't want to answer it. The left has said that only transformative economic policies which tackle climate change and wealth inequality, and in the US, lack of access to healthcare, only that can defeat the rise of authoritarian nationalism. But whether it's the 2019 general election in the UK or the Democratic primary, that theory has been somewhat derailed. So I want to address this question first to you, Ilhan. Is it time for the left to admit that the strategy's failed, shut up shop, and let the moderates have a go?
Absolutely not. We still have to be in the fight. We currently have systems that are failing us at every turn. And, I think accepting defeat is not what we need to do as progressives. Because we certainly have a lot of work that needs to get done, and we know what it means to continue to fight and be in the struggle and push for change. I mean, here in the United States, every single progress we've ever gotten came because people mobilized and demanded that change. And we are now seeing mass mobilization in the streets, and we're going to have to be ready to meet that moment.
Diane, if you'd like to chip in on this theme, is it time for the left to just give Dharma a break?
Give moderates a chance, don't be ridiculous. First of all, what would happen if we left things to the right? It would be terrible for people who are mine and in Lance colour. It will be black and brown people that will suffer the most if we just let politics move to the right without offering any resistance. It's not just issues around racial justice and immigration, but it's just generally. So we have to put up a fight. We also have to remember that in politics, sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It was after the Second World War. You had Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who up to that point was the most progressive president I think the United States ever had. And he made very big advances. And we, in Britain actually, after that same war, we had a government called the Attlee government, which made huge advances. We had healthcare for all. We had more money put into our welfare system. So the left has made advances in the past. We can make advances again. And it's absolutely essential for ordinary people that we continue the struggle and we continue to push ahead.
I mean, I think that's a really good point about the 2 steps forward and the 1 step back. Just a little apology to some of the listeners. There are some sound issues, but we'll be tinkering with that. Our tech team is working busily away. But on a similar theme, I guess, I want to talk about the tricky business of having both anti-racist politics and class politics at the same time in an intensely hostile media environment. Identity politics is a lightning rod, and the two of you are kind of living embodiments of that lightning rod. You're advocating for economic change, and you also have the temerity to be Black at the same time. And you've got a bit of the left, which says, maybe we could win if we just got rid of this pesky anti-racism, or insistence on trans rights, or feminism, that it's the identity bit which is divisive, but it would be fine if we just kept to our class politics.
Well, I mean, first of all, I hate the phrase identity politics. White men coined that phrase. What they mean by it is anytime you talk about race or women or sexuality, because the people that talk about identity politics think there's only one valid identity, and that's theirs, white men who already have power. So I hate the phrase. It's a way of diminishing and disparaging the fight for equality. As for, is there a conflict between class politics and race politics? My view is you can't have a genuine or effective class politics if it doesn't have a commitment to racial justice at the heart of it. That is my view. Ilhan, what do you think?
Ilhan?
It is so true. You can't separate the two. I mean, we are currently in a system, right, that is not economically failing. 90% of people here in the United States, but it's also having disproportionate impact on the lives of Black and Brown people. Black women here in the United States are more than twice likely to die from just giving birth. We have, in my state, 50% of Black people are either uninsured or underinsured when it comes to healthcare, and so forth, right? When you talk about asset building and wealth building, when you talk about home ownership and the amount of people who are shackled with student debt, we are disproportionately impacted. And so when you have policies that don't have a racial lens to them, then you are leaving out a portion of society that's not being served by that system. I'm going to paraphrase a quote from Martin Luther King, who said, what is it to have a right at the counter if you can't buy a hamburger? And so for many of us, we understand that there is a connection and a correlation between the disparities that we have and the racialized system that wasn't really originally designed to include us. I mean, Diane is right. When people talk about identity politics, they don't recognize that their policies are rooted in identity. They have decided to create a priority for certain people based on identity. Just a few days ago, Donald Trump was in my home state of Minnesota and was talking about how Minnesotans are doing great because they have a particular gene. And they are not doing so well with their refugee population. And so when you have, leaders who are setting policy with that sort of mentality, and those of us, and no one bats an eye about their rhetoric and the policy that's informed by that rhetoric, but people get upset and say we are dividers or we are radical because we want policies that uplift everyone. And you can't have those policies if you are not targeting those that are at the bottom or marginalized in society to bring them up. And so for us, we've seen what this pandemic has exposed when it comes to the racial and societal disparities that exist. We are now seeing, that you all are more fortunate than we are, but here in America, we are seeing what happens when you have a healthcare system that is tied to your employment. In a country where we already had disproportionate number of people uninsured, we now have 12 million people who lost their health coverage because they lost their job. And that's cruel. That's a very cruel system. And that disproportionately will impact Black and brown people in this country. And, even when we think about immigration, and I know you all have had a rigorous debate about this in the UK. But here in the United States, you have people who are up in arms about folks who are undocumented or the flood of immigrants. And the only immigrant that they are opposed to seems to have a particular kind of skin color and come from particular parts of the world, because you don't see anyone screaming about the folks who are undocumented in the ways in which, the president's wives have been. You don't see people talking about chain migration that has allowed for the president's wife to now have her parents be in the country and have legal status. And so for me, I think it is lazy, and in many times it's malicious to have a conversation about identity politics that is divorced from the particular identities that are prioritized in our systems.
I mean, I remember once talking to you, Diane, about this very topic, and something that you said to me always stuck with me, which is the category of a migrant is very slippery. Mm-hmm. When people are talking about migrant bashing, they think me and you, who were both born in the UK, are migrants on account of our skin color. So the category of migrant bashing is never going to just stay there neatly.
But also, in Britain, certainly, talking about immigration has for a very long time been a euphemism for race. It's what Ilhan was saying. The immigrants they're really talking about are people that are Black or brown. But why it's important that we don't separate our class politics and the fight for racial justice is actually fight for the class, the fight to advance working people generally will be weaker if you're not reaching out to and involving people of colour. You weaken yourselves. You allow employers, you allow politicians like Donald Trump.
Diane, do you want to try without your headphones? We are hearing maybe 1/3 of every.
Yeah, and maybe just a little closer. Little closer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
I think you've just cut out a bit. I think maybe leaning a little further in, and I think turning the sound down on your laptop just a touch might fix it.
Okay. This technical stuff always defeats me.
I'm the least techie person on the planet. Tell you what, why don't you pick up where you left off on that thought?
Is that better?
I'm afraid you're still out. Tell you what I'll get is for our tech person to talk to you in the chat real quickly, and I'm going to address a question to Ilhan and invite you to come back on it. So, Ilhan, the thing that I've been dying to ask you is, because I know that you've got a critique of structures, all right? You're not someone who I think of as naive or, who underestimates the scale of the challenge before them. And so one of the things that I'm really curious to know is, how can you ask people to believe that the American criminal justice system is capable of reform through electoral means and peaceful political participation, when, as we can see with the refusal to charge the police officers involved in the killing of Breonna Taylor, even in these most egregious abuses of power, there isn't basic due process.
So, I mean, we currently have a system that we all have to recognize is really not just for many of us. There's a two-tiered system. And, you know, the policies that allow for this system to be unjust towards many folks here in the United States and maybe in the UK are policies written by policymakers. And so for me as an organizer, I recognize that it's important for there to be a movement and for people to speak about what transformative change in our systems can look like. And in many cases, reforms haven't really worked out, right? We do have to go back to the drawing board and systematically change these systems. But we can't do that unless we have policymakers who are responsive to these calls for a more just system. And so I'll give you an example. In Minnesota, we had the murder of George Floyd take place. And in many cases, the systems were starting to fail us. And it took folks taking out to the streets, demanding for the system to have justice, that justice will not be denied, because we all watched for 8 minutes and 46 seconds for the life to be stifled out of George Floyd in the hands of Minneapolis police officers. But we also knew that we had, you know, elected folks in office that can be held responsible and accountable for the actions that they were going to take. And when the charges first came, they weren't responsive to the gravity and the severeness of that murder. And they weren't expanded to all of the other officers who were responsible for that death. And, you know, if we didn't have people like my predecessor, Attorney General Keith Ellison, in office to not only shift the severity of the charge, but to also expand those charges to the other three officers, we wouldn't see the beginning of justice to take shape for George Floyd. And so that really is an example that can be utilized by many people to mobilize for people to get involved and to vote. Because, you know, in Breonna Taylor's case, we all know that even in the most simplest explanation of there just being an accident, right? They got in there, it was wrong, and they shot without taking a look, and there was no intent. I'm not saying that that's what took place, but even if we reduce it to that, accidental deaths have consequences. And so we know that the police act with impunity, and that impunity is given to them by the law. And we also know that the charges were entrusted with a grand jury. In Minnesota, we don't have a grand jury process anymore, because we all mobilized to get rid of a grand jury process that would make that would when an officer was involved in shooting. And so that's something that they can do with change in leadership, with change in policy. And so for me, I have always understood, and I'm sure this is true for Diane, that there is a correlation between the policies that we have and the people who are in positions of influence who create those policies. And if we want to change these policies, we have to put people in place who understand what it means to lead a more just society.
I mean, I'd love to get Diane's thoughts on this, because she's really been at the forefront of many police accountability initiatives in this country, a leading light in the UK anti-racist movement. And yet in this country, we haven't had a single conviction for murder or manslaughter of a police officer involved in a death in custody since at least 1991. Do you think that this system is capable of being reformed, Diane?
I
think we... Yep. If you just unmute yourself there. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. At last. I think it was GCHQ hacking our stream. It's the deep state.
It must be. Why don't you ask Ilhan if she thinks the system can be reformed?
Do you think it's likely it can be reformed?
I think the system needs to be transformed. You know, I don't really have hope in some of the reforms that people have proposed. I think we need drastic change. You know, it is really possible for our country to live up to its ideals of, you know, justice and liberty for all. And we currently are not proposing anything that get us really closer to that. And, you know, you have police systems that were born out of, you know, a space where a lot of the people that they were supposed to police and exercise the rule of law onto were not seen as full human beings. And this is still pervasive in this system. And you can't really reform a system that doesn't inherently recognize your humanity, your existence, your personhood, a system that still functions as if property is a bigger priority than life. And so we need transformation. We don't only want the systems to change, but we also want society to transform with it, and to recognize that, you know, our pains, our struggles, our joys are as valued as everyone else in society. And just because we are born in black skin or brown skin, we are not less worthy as human beings, and we shouldn't have access to the rights enshrined in our Constitution.
So the last question that I want to ask to both of you, because we've only got 5 minutes of this event left, and I could listen to you both for hours, is about the left's priorities at this particular moment. Both Britain and America are facing economic crises, the likes of which are historic in their scale. While coronavirus infections continue to rise in both countries, another form of lockdown looks increasingly likely. And we know that the people who are bearing the brunt of all of this, both in terms of the virus and the economic consequences, are working class people, migrants, and people of color across both countries. And at the same time, there are lots of people on the left, on both sides of the Atlantic, who feel very despondent because of the results of the Democratic primary and the 2019 general election. What are the issues you feel that the left should be prioritizing? And how, strategically, do we reinvigorate ourselves with a sense of purpose after, getting spanked a bit at the ballot box?
I'll let Diane take this one.
Yeah, I would love to hear from Diane. Did you hear the question, Diane, about how the left can reinvigorate itself in a time of crisis?
What? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, I think one thing we have to do is a lot of grassroots organizing. I know a lot of left groups here in Britain are doing things about tenants' rights and eviction. And I think those grassroots campaigns are very important.
And Ilhan, what about yourself? I'm sure you'd agree with the grassroots organizing bit, but where should the energy be focused?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think the connection really to the movement is around addressing social and economic neglects that continue to persist, right, and have caused the severe disparities that we see, whether it is economically, whether it is in healthcare, in education, in the criminal in the criminal justice system. And we have an opportunity really to be as bold and as aggressive as we can, because there is change that can take place on a municipal level. There's change that can take place on a state level, and there's change that can take place on a federal level. It might look like our movement is taking a beating in a national level, but many of our localities, the movement is making is having a real impact in changing ordinances and state laws. And we have to continue to do that because it's a build-up, right? And it is a movement. And the more chances we get to see change take place, the more it will excite us to continue to fight for the transformative change that we know it's possible on a national level. So I find a lot of hope, as someone who used to work at the city of Minneapolis on a municipal level, someone who used to be a state representative. I know the kind of change that can take place in those levels that actually has, real consequences on people's lives. And there is a lot that's getting done right now, not just electorally, but in regards to, shifting the way in which we approach policy transformation on those levels.
I'm really glad that you keep dropping in the word transformation for the world transformed. That's a great bit of branding there. Diane, since we've got you, I would love for you to finish your thought about the relationship between racial justice and migrants' rights, because I felt you were really on a roll there.
Well, all my life, I've struggled mostly with men on the left who felt that racial justice was somehow a different and perhaps more marginal issue than class politics. And I think that racial justice has to be at the heart of your class politics.
Something that my mum always said to me is that there is no class without race and there is no race without class. These are two things which made each other. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time together. I could have let this run on for days, but I know that both of you have got very important matters to attend to. So please, if everyone can join me in offering big thanks to Diane Abbott and Ilhan Omar, two of my all-time heroes, really, politically. So when I tell you, I'm gassed to have been able to host this. I'm going to screenshot this image right here and send it to my mum. She will be delighted. So thank you both for joining us tonight. And hopefully this will be the first conversation of many with the two of you.
Looking forward to it. Thank you for having me. So great to meet you, Diane.
Too excited. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Enjoy your Friday. Goodbye.
View the full TWT20 program and become a supporter today to help us deliver political education all year round at theworldtransformed.org.